So now let's move into the third kind of pasture of this, which is how does this actually work? These all sound like great ideas. Yes, the researchers and biotechs maybe operate in a little bit of a different field. They have different sort of mindsets, perhaps different training. Okay, now we have these few great ideas that we're talking about how to bridge the gap. But now, how does it actually work? And as importantly, not work? You've spent your career on kind of both sides of this. What do you think makes for a successful and productive relationship between research foundations and, I'll just say, research capital more generally, and the private sector? What works, and in what circumstances does it just not work, whether it's behavioral or otherwise?
The rare skill set that we tried to bring when I was at NPM Capital was there's a lot of barriers to basically getting a company stood up, getting the licenses established with the academic institutions, fleshing out the intellectual property position, which oftentimes gets started with the academic filings, but tends to basically fall short of where you would really want it to be from the commercial perspective. And basically trying to get all those pieces put in place, and we thought that was a rare skill set that we could basically bring to the party with professional venture capital. But a lot of times there was a misunderstanding of what we thought was the value prop on our side with what I think the foundations and frankly academic institutions thought the value that they were providing. So there was a bit of a misunderstanding just because of how much capital, how much expertise we thought we were bringing on the NPM side, sort of how far you really had to go with an academic quote-unquote breakthrough. The distance from that to sort of real value was pretty substantial. And I think, as we all know, having lived it now for a while, the chances of success are unfortunately not so high. So you have to take a couple of different shots, and you sort of have to have a broad enough perspective and a broad enough portfolio of activities, even within one company, much less across a portfolio, to ultimately win. And I think there's a little bit of, obviously if it's your baby, your discovery, there's a necessary sort of tunnel vision about how valuable that is, but that tends to lead to some misunderstandings about working productively together. And I think there's still room to sort of smooth that out and make that substantially more efficient.
Just maybe to follow up on that a little bit, because I know a lot of people in the room fund research scientists in one way or another, directly or indirectly, as part of even a diligence process. Say something about the types of activities, behaviors, personalities that research scientists that are successful in working with commercial actors. What do they bring to the table? And actually, Matt, I'd ask you the same thing. You just seen it from your perspective.
It's a really interesting question. So I was involved, and still am involved, in an angel group that invests in companies with roots in Israel's research institutions, including the 𝐇𝐢𝐭. People started off philanthropically, funding the different labs. The scientists that are most effective, to me, that are getting funded are, I don't know any other way to say this, but they're the most charming, articulate, charismatic. That, it's not all scientists, believe it or not, can hold a conversation about something outside of their area of expertise. So the ones that are really good at getting their labs funded are the really well-rounded scientists. And if you have someone that's well-rounded and also brilliant in their field, and that's sort of a home run. And I think that they tend, at least in my observation, which is not as broad as some of the other folks, they tend to attract a disproportionate amount of the philanthropy and the grants.
Are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing? I was more asking about from a biotech executive's perspective or venture capitalist perspective, what are you looking for in behaviors? And Luke, I want to make sure you get
Yeah, so when I talk to some of these scientists directly and I'm trying to find out what they're doing and is there anything investable right now, usually there isn't. But the things that I wound up pursuing were things that were out of their lab already for 2 or 3 years. Right? It's formed a company, it's had, people talk about the valley of death. It's also sometimes just a flat plane that's flat for a long time before it hits an inflection point. And sometimes these things just need to season as companies outside of the academic environment for a while, and it takes a long time. So I'm looking for things that have de-risked the science in some way or another, whether that's happened in the lab, but often it's happened outside of the lab. And going back to kind of point number one, the philanthropic dollars that would be useful, I think, for investors is when they can participate in this de-risking of the science to the extent possible. That makes it, because investors, I don't know what it was like for you, but tend to be more comfortable, at least I am, with kind of commercial risk rather than sort of like the basic science. We talked before about taking some science risk, but that would be a useful thing for the research capital.
I think that's well said. But to pick up your point, Sean, I think the scientists that I think are the most effective in helping getting companies launched are those that appreciate the gaps in what's really, even in their own work. You do want someone who wants to be a proselytizer and a salesman for your stuff, and obviously being charismatic helps tremendously. But you really need somebody who also understands where the holes are. They're the expert in the field, and you do need somebody who can bring that perspective and help basically address the problems in some ways kind of before they occur. You need somebody to look around the corner. If you have to basically hit every single pothole yourself, it's going to be a long, long road. And there are brilliant scientists who I think are able to look around the corner, and to some extent, the intuition of building the right companies is figuring out that you are working with a scientist who kind of has that kind of sort of perspective and has that kind of capability.
Meg or Stephen, maybe just based on that, what those two just described, how do you think these sort of bridging models help to mitigate that?
Well, I hope they are too. I might not be the person to answer that question, but I think what we have to remember too is that investors are investing in a business with a scientific strategy. There aren't many who can manage a company, be in the C-suite of the company from start to end, and by end I mean commercialization. That's a very rare breed, and so I think always sort of self-analyzing and then asking yourself, how long will I be involved in this? And I think the most successful sort of place for us, this type of investor, is to coach them towards the decision making and really prepare the company, the business itself, to onboard traditional capital. I do a lot of coaching, mentoring, guiding with my CEOs. It doesn't always work, but I think it's additive. At least it's additive to the ecosystem. It may not be incredibly impactful for that particular company, but I feel like I'm doing my part.
So I'll make a different set of comments, not to minimize at all what's been said, because I think getting companies ready to be funded is a really important and valuable thing that some of the not-for-profits and philanthropies can do, both universities as well as some of the research foundations. But the other thing that's really important to remember is that some of these disease philanthropies have tremendous network and access to doctors and clinicians. And when it comes time to run a clinical study, they are the experts. They are one phone call away from the experts. And so if you're a company that has a platform and you're moving into the clinic and you're trying to choose your indication, that is another brilliant spot where you can access these disease philanthropies to help them figure out what patients, how are we going to enroll them, what are we going to look for, what does the FDA want to see, how can I, if I'm going forward in lupus, how can I construct a type 1 program to be a second indication to validate my platform. So I would say it's not just the get ready for funding, but it's how do you interact with the well-funded companies that are looking to do multiple expansions that are raising $50 to $100 million, and how do you get your network of physicians into that conversation? How do you get a seat at the table so you can make sure that those companies avoid the mistakes that you've seen 5 other companies make? I mean, that's where you really make progress, because sometimes it's just not doing the stupid thing, but doing the thing that might actually work and anticipates what the FDA may want to see.